Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to part two, getting a little vibration, a little energy going here. Welcome back to part two of Vibrate Higher Daily. I'm reading this book by Layla Delia. Today is part two. I'm here. I made it. I think this is really good because it's accountability for me, and then I'm accountable to you. And we can all be accountable to each other. I feel like we can grow, heal, discover through this journey from love, from understanding, from discovery, all through this book, which I feel like it has a little bit of all of that. One thing I would like to say is that, or just give you a heads up on, you may want to get, not you may want to, you do want to get a journal, because at some point in the book, very soon, maybe part 3 or 4, there are questions and assessments that are exercises that she asked us to do. So I will be doing all of this with you. Like I said, let's do this together. So grab a notebook, a journal. I have some really special ones that are coming down the line, but until then, just grab something to write on to be able to take note and go through the assessment in the book. Okay, without further ado, I will get started with the our session today, our session of Vibrating Higher. My story. Today, I no longer live in the consciousness that I used to, one where I identified as a victim who is stuck, powerless, and purposeless. The process I share in this book led to the reconfiguration of my entire life, my physical health, even reconfiguring my appearance. As I reflect on my journey and the experiences I've had with trauma, despair, domestic violence, emotional pain, heartbreak, let's do it again. As I reflect on my journey and the experiences I've had with trauma, despair, domestic violence, emotional pain, heartbreak, a limited mindset, toxic relationships, and the sticky places I've been in and out of, I send myself love, not judgment. I do so because at the time of those experiences, I didn't know about vibration. It was there all along, as it is in us all. But I wasn't at a place where I could yet even recognize it within myself. I was living and experiencing life through a lower vibration and limited mindset. And as with vibrations came the life experiences to match. When I was a young girl, I lived in the heart of South Central Los Angeles, war zone neighborhood, South Central as we called it. In our community, gang life, liquor stores, hustlers, broken dreams, flashy street styles, and beautiful people with unrealized higher potential existed on every street corner and stared back at you in passing. On a vibrational level, much was low, from the food quality to the education to the lack of wellness and self-development resources. The culture of lack within inner cities, such as where I grew up, has a direct adverse effect on the cultural tone and overall quality of life for masses of people and their personal and shared experiences. South Central Los Angeles in the 1980s and 1990s was a new kind of struggle and negative vortex for pretty much everyone there. And so much was contributing to it. It was a time when crime was at an all-time high, a world where we were fed low vibrations, masked as the norm, and where the culture was, as I came to realize, being underserved vibrationally. And with most urban cities still, it was common for us youth growing up in that environment to create peer bonds through our pain. We were all seeking affirmation and validation of some kind from one another. I'm grateful through it all that I had an advocate. I spent most of my childhood with my father, a man who was many things. an entrepreneur full of dreams, a transplant from New Mexico, and a practicing Buddhist here and there. My father's ability to keep a positive mindset and his pursuit of happiness while in the midst of such an environment such as South Central had a deep foundational impact on me. No matter what went on in the war zone neighborhood surrounding us, my father always created good vibrations and a positive atmosphere in our home. He had a way of energetically turning our home into a sanctuary, a safe haven. My strongest memories about our home environment are dancing in front of the television to Soul Train on beautiful Saturday afternoons, hearing lots of 70s and 80s soul records playing, laughing, the burning of incense, and feeling pure love. He knew how to turn up the vibes in this way and shift our atmosphere into something higher, lighter, and better for the soul. And sure enough, to this day, dancing around at home, music, laughter, incense, and love are some of the essential go-to medicines for my soul. Powerfully, they bring me back to myself every time. My father did the best he could with what he had to work with. Using his Buddhist mindset and his joy for life, he taught me the skills for navigating our surroundings and potential traps. With a deep inner peace, a compassionate mindset, and a passion for progress, he instilled in me how to rise above our environment and the ability to see our situation and the time there as temporary. Yet, in spite of the most necessary, intentional, and urgent efforts to shelter me, including eventually moving out of South Central, I was on many levels still affected by the negative elements around us. The various elements felt close to unavoidable. What I didn't know yet was how to respond to high and low vibrations in my environment. At times, I'd find myself swaying, adapting, and confronting to both energies. Many of us feel this tension. We are all empathetic to some degree, and not knowing how to listen to our inner power when outside forces are strong creates imbalance and strains our progress. We are all empathetic to some degree, and not knowing how to listen to our inner power and when outside forces are strong creates imbalance and strains our progress. Here she quotes, "Our past is a force that doesn't always like to see its end, and our future is a force that doesn't want to abort it." Our past is a force that doesn't always like to see its end come, and our future is a force that doesn't want us to abort it. Competing worlds. Now on my shoulders was my father, shaping me for a higher potential life. Beyond our environment at the time of the 80s and 90s inner city street culture. Now on one of my shoulders was my father, shaping me for a higher potential life beyond our environment at the time of the 80s and 90s inner city street culture. On the other shoulder was a collection of traumas. My initiation into the writing and work I do today was like it was for many others, through the path of pain and suffering. Even though my parents did the best they knew how to protect me, deep pain had entered my life in 4 main ways. Over a short period of time, I was sexually violated as a child by a trusted teenage caretaker. At the same time, my parents had divorced and I was not adapting well to it. I slipped into a state of depression, so much so that at the age of 9, I told my mother I wanted to die because my family was broken. That's a lot. I was not adapting well to it all. I slipped into a state of depression, so much that at the age of 9, I told my mother that I wanted to die because my family was broken. On top of all of this, at the age of 5, I had been diagnosed with a form of epilepsy known as petit mal. Every time I came out of a seizure at school, I'd come back to a crowd of laughing children, many of whom mocked and bullied me without fail. This painfully humiliating time happened all throughout my lower grade school until I eventually and gratefully outgrew the seizures at the age of 12. And a very welcomed healing it was. In addition to these early childhood traumas, I also experienced verbal abuse from my mother's fourth husband. He was a white man from a small town in the South who loved my Spanish mother but could do without her half-Black children. Racial slurs were a norm to him. This period strained my relationship with my mother. And she quotes, "Take a pause to appreciate how far you've come." This period strained my relationship with my mother, a woman who loved her children dearly but had deep unprocessed pain of her own that was clouding her judgment. She would detest her husband's behavior one day with great apologies to me and then dismiss it in another day. I never knew which type of day it would be. My time with my mother back then was in sharp contrast to the safe, functional, and comforting home life my father was providing for me. This was the epitome of low vibration versus high vibrations in full effect. These collective experiences created deep depression in me as a child, teen, and young adult. I experienced regular stomach aches, poor digestion, anxiety, shortness of breath, panic attacks, and fatigue, and I was underweight. I acquired what John Bradshaw calls in his book Homecoming, Reclaiming and Healing Your Inner Child, a spiritual wound. I could never make sense of why I was so torn and at home in both worlds. I could never make sense of why I was so torn at home in both worlds. One of the spiritual path of progress with my father and the other of pain and anxiety with my mother. Later in life, the dots connected for me and everything made sense. I came to see that my past had to be exactly what it was. The purpose and deep passion within me today that I use to advocate for higher potential living and healing for others are only possible because of the sum total of my combined past experiences, from trauma and pain to love, joy and spirituality, from financial, family struggle to affluence. I can relate to it all, but it would take years for me to realize this, as there was first to be great mountains to survive and overcome. Dark night of the soul. Yeah. By the time I was in my early 20s, the damage, although I was unaware of it at the time, began to reveal itself. It was showing up in my choices. For instance, it showed up in the relationships I was in, which turned into domestic violent nightmares of 2 years until I escaped in the middle of the night. I had internalized the wrong messages, that pain and abuse were norms. I had already had a low sense of self-worth, which led me to accept such an abusive relationship in the first place. But the effects of that abuse diminished whatever little amount of self-worth I had left. At the time, I was emptied out, or so I thought, and I couldn't untangle myself from the side effects. And I couldn't untangle myself from the effects. After escaping that abusive relationship, I found myself disoriented and hopeless, to the point of trying to end my life. I couldn't figure out how to make the pain and its negative patterns stop. But as fate would have it, my past, the pain, and the suicide attempt would not win or have the final say. After I attempted suicide, I was unconscious for 3 days. And after regaining consciousness, my first reaction while in this dazed state was anger because I was still alive and, needless to say, unsuccessful in escaping the pain of my life. But then, moments later, this other feeling of awareness rose within me, and my focus shifted into a comforting realization that my life had just been saved from ending in this tragic way. in the tragic way it nearly did. Into a comforting realization that my life had just been saved from ending in the tragic way it nearly did. The deep-rooted pain and duress that had been guiding and affecting my life for so long had not won. Quote, "The divine does not allow our pain or dark nights to have the final say. The divine does not allow our pain or dark nights to have the final say." Quote, "Don't rush the process. It takes time returning to yourself." Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Various spiritual teachings call this experience the dark night of the soul. It is a spiritual phenomenon originally coined by Spanish mystic, poet, priest, and saint José de la Cruz, widely known as John of the Cross, that happens to people to intentionally shake them awake, to activate their higher purpose, and to convert them and their lives into something new. As a spiritual practitioner and wellness educator, I've seen it many times. It's a temporary period of inner spiritual crisis. Also, you don't realize it's temporary when you're in the midst of it, when the life you've come to know no longer makes sense, is no longer tolerable, often to the point of isolation and depression settling in. I can attest to that. My life had a divine appointment to not die physically, but spiritually and conceptually. My suicide attempt called the death of the lifestyle. My suicide attempt called for the death of the lifestyle, mindset, and cycle that were no longer serving me. For other people, the dark night of the soul may look different. It can be a more subtle and less intense experience that includes some pain and frustration, but no life trauma or spiritual crisis. Both ways leading to awakening. We see this in the case of Siddhartha Gautama, who through his own dark night of the soul later would become known to the world as the Buddha. Siddhartha was a beloved prince who lived a privileged and luxurious life. I will have to double check that to make sure that I'm pronouncing that correctly. I will make sure to come back to that. There was no initial life trauma or crisis in his case, but he became profoundly dissatisfied with his life and experienced an inner knowing and a tugging of his heart and soul toward a higher direction and purpose. For Siddhartha, this took the form of forsaking his royal life of privilege, giving it all up to reach enlightenment and higher purpose. For me, this dark night reckoning was the beginning of something new. It led me to realizing that the slowly sprouting seeds planted deep within me all those years before, the ones that got me out of my unhealthy relationships and toxic life, were finally ready to break through and rise above the soil. Seeds germinate and grow only when the conditions are right. So having a new path that supported me in this way was essential. Seeds germinate and grow only when the conditions are right. So having a new path that supported me in this way was essential. That is part 2 today. It was a little bumpy today, but if you made it through, I appreciate it. I hope you still got the gist of the message. Listen to it, re-listen to it, rewind it, listen to it. We'll have part 3 tomorrow. I will be better prepared for you. But like I said, we're going through this journey together. And my meditation, my hope is to vibrate as high as we can and align with all the good that's ours, all the good that is there for us. The dark night of the soul really speaks to me because I feel like I'm in that space myself. and it's pretty severe. So as an artist, I think we use a lot of our body and our minds and our vessel. And when you're at turmoil with that spiritual transition and the death of your old self, the phoenix process, the rebirth, it can interrupt a lot for you. So, like I said, let's do this together. Let's heal together. I will show up for you guys tomorrow, and we will continue the rest of the book. And hopefully it's a bit smoother. I'm coming to you with love. I'm holding all the space I can for you. Please share, like, tap in to this raw healing session. With love, Misty.